Marcus Hendris leaned back in his chair, looked straight at Sabrina Vale, one of the most powerful women in Silicon Valley, and said, loud enough for the entire restaurant to hear, "You should have told me you were in a wheelchair. I wouldn't have wasted my time." The room went dead silent. Every fork stopped. Every glass paused mid-air. And Sabrina, a woman who had built a billion-dollar empire from nothing, who had fought her way into boardrooms full of men twice her age, felt her face go cold. But here's what nobody in that restaurant expected. The man who stood up for her wasn't security, wasn't a friend. He was a grease-stained mechanic who had no business being at a table that expensive. Drop a comment with your city. Let me know where you're watching from. And if this story hits close to home, hit subscribe. You don't want to miss where this goes. The reservation was for two. The table was tucked in the far corner of Veritas, the kind of restaurant where the lighting was always soft and the prices were never printed on the menu. Sabrina had chosen it deliberately, quiet, intimate, the kind of place where a first date could breathe without the noise of the city pressing in from all sides. She had arrived 12 minutes early. That wasn't anxiety. That was control. Sabrina Vale did not let circumstances surprise her. She read a room the way other people read weather. Intuitively, rapidly, with an eye for what was about to change. Her chair moved smoothly between the tables, and she caught the way the hostess tried not to look at it. She caught the way the busboy stepped aside too quickly, too carefully, as if she were something fragile. She caught all of it, stored it quietly behind her eyes, and smiled anyway. "Right here is perfect," Sabrina said. She positioned herself at the table, folded her hands, and opened the menu. She had 30 minutes. She used 28 of them to review the quarterly projections she had forwarded to her phone, and 2 of them to simply sit, to breathe, to remind herself that this was supposed to be a good thing, that she had agreed to this because her assistant Dana had practically begged her, because her therapist had gently and persistently suggested that professional success was not the same thing as a life. And because somewhere deep underneath the armor of titles and achievements and 12-hour days, Sabrina Vale was 34 years old and tired of eating dinner alone. Marcus Hendris had seemed different. They had met through a mutual contact at a conference in San Francisco 3 weeks ago. Not face-to-face, but through a message that came into her professional inbox, polite and direct. "I heard you speak today. I've been thinking about what you said for the past 2 hours. I'd like to know the rest of your thoughts, if you're open to it." She hadn't been open to it, not immediately. But the messages continued, and they were smart. He asked good questions. He listened, or at least, he appeared to listen, which in Sabrina's world counted for more than most people realized. He talked about his work in venture capital with a kind of self-awareness that she rarely encountered in men who had money. He didn't try to impress her with numbers. He didn't ask her about her company's valuation within the first 5 minutes the way so many others did, as if she were a stock to be assessed rather than a person to be known. Over 3 weeks of messages and 2 phone calls, Marcus Hendris had been good. That was the only word she had for it. Simply, quietly, good. So she had said yes to dinner. What she had not done, and this was the detail that would matter later, the detail she would turn over in her mind for a long time afterward, was tell him about the wheelchair. Not because she was hiding it, because she refused to lead with it. Sabrina had made that decision years ago, after the accident, after the surgery, after the long and brutal recalibration of everything she thought her life would look like. She had decided, consciously, deliberately, after months of grief and rage and painful clarity, that her disability was not an introduction. It was not a warning label. It was not a confession that required someone else's acceptance before she could move forward. It was part of her, but it was not all of her. So she didn't tell Marcus, and she told herself that a man who was genuinely interested in her mind, in her work, in the person she had shown herself to be through 3 weeks of conversation, that man would not make it an issue. She believed that. Right up until the moment Marcus Hendris walked through the door of Veritas, scanned the room, spotted her, and stopped. Not the graceful pause of a man collecting himself before approaching a first date. A stop. Flat. Hard. Like something in him had locked. Sabrina watched it happen from across the restaurant. She watched him see the chair, and she watched his face do the thing she had learned to recognize. The rapid recalibration. The flicker of something he tried to suppress but couldn't quite manage in time. Something between surprise and disappointment. No, worse than disappointment. Inconvenience. She kept her expression even. She picked up her water glass and took a slow sip. He crossed the restaurant toward her. His steps were deliberate, his jaw slightly set. He was a handsome man. That was still true. Tailored jacket, dark hair, the practiced ease of someone who had never once walked into a room and doubted his right to be there. He sat down across from her without saying hello. "So," Marcus said, "this is something you could have mentioned." Sabrina set her glass down. "Good evening, Marcus." "I'm serious." He picked up the menu, but he wasn't looking at it. His eyes were moving over her, over the chair, over the space between them, with something that made her stomach tighten. "I feel like I was, I don't know, misled." "You weren't misled," she said. Her voice was steady. That was a thing she had practiced, steadiness, when the inside of her chest was doing something else entirely. "I told you who I am. I told you what I do, what I value, what I'm looking for. All of that was accurate. That's not what I mean, and you know it." "Then say what you mean." He finally looked at her directly. "Why didn't you tell me you were in a wheelchair?" "Because it's not the first thing I am," she said. "It's a pretty significant detail, Sabrina." "So is the fact that you apparently can't get through a first hello without making it the subject of conversation." She kept her voice level. Not cold. Level. There was a difference. Cold was a wall. Level was a choice. "I thought we were here to have dinner." "I'm just—" He exhaled, shook his head, glanced around the restaurant in a way that made her understand, suddenly, that he was aware of the other tables. That part of his discomfort was being seen here, with her, with the chair. "I'm processing. Take your time." But he didn't take his time. He leaned forward and dropped his voice. And what came out of him was the thing he had been holding since he walked through the door. "I just feel like you should have given me the choice, to decide if this was something I could handle." The word landed like a stone. Handle. Sabrina didn't move. She held herself very still, and she looked at Marcus Hendris across the candlelit table of the nicest restaurant she had ever chosen to be humiliated in, and she made herself breathe. She had heard versions of this before. She had heard it dressed up in gentler language, softer tone, more diplomatic packaging. Men who said things like, "I just want to make sure I can give you what you need," when what they meant was that the wheelchair made them feel like the ground had shifted under them, and they wanted someone to blame for the vertigo. But she had never heard it this fast, this bare. Handle. As though she were a burden to be assessed before acceptance. "Handle," she repeated quietly. "You know what I mean." "I do," she said. That's the problem. She reached down and picked up her bag from beside the wheel of her chair, and she was already running the calculation, the exit route, the distance to the door, the logistics of leaving a restaurant with her composure intact and her spine straight, when Marcus, emboldened by her quiet, kept going. He sat back in his chair and let out a breath that was almost a laugh, and he said, loud enough in the stillness of a quiet restaurant on a Wednesday evening for the tables around them to hear, I just don't understand why someone like you even tries to date. I mean, honestly, what are you offering someone? It's not like you can— He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. The table to their left went absolutely silent. The couple behind Sabrina stopped mid-conversation. Even the soft ambient music seemed to hold its breath. And Sabrina, who had a company to run and a board to manage and a father who had never once looked at her the way she needed him to, felt something in her chest collapse inward in a way she hadn't felt since the hospital. Since the day a doctor had stood at the foot of her bed and gently explained that some things don't come back. She was not going to cry in front of Marcus Hendris. That was the first clear thought. The second was that she was not going to give him the satisfaction of watching her leave. She was going to sit here, in this chair, in this restaurant, and she was going to find the words to dismantle him so quietly and completely that he would feel it for weeks. She was drawing in the breath to speak, measuring it, shaping it, when a voice came from the table directly beside them. Hey. Not loud, not aggressive, just direct. The way a man speaks when he is not performing, not trying to be heard across the room, but making sure one specific person hears him. Sabrina turned. The man at the next table looked like he had come from somewhere else entirely. Not the kind of restaurant where entrees were $40 and the staff addressed you by last name. He was in a clean flannel shirt, dark jeans, work boots that had seen real work. His hands wrapped around a coffee cup were the hands of someone who used them. Calloused. Capable. There was a small grease shadow near his left thumb that soap hadn't completely resolved. He was looking at Marcus Hendris with an expression that was very calm and very clear. You done? He said. Marcus blinked. Excuse me? I'm asking if you're done. The man didn't raise his voice. He didn't stand up. He just held Marcus's gaze with the particular steadiness of someone who has nothing to prove and therefore nothing to perform. Because I've been sitting here for the last 10 minutes, and I've listened to you talk to this woman like she's an inconvenience you didn't budget for. And I'm asking, politely, if you're done. Marcus straightened. This is a private conversation. It stopped being private when you started making it loud, the man said. Restaurants have acoustics. So do principals. A beat of silence. Marcus looked around, at the neighboring table, at the couple behind, at the hostess who had quietly materialized near the edge of the room. The weight of the room was on him now, and he felt it. Sabrina could see him feel it. The shift from aggressor to spectacle. The sudden awareness that he was the thing being looked at. I was just being honest, Marcus said, and the defense in it, the smallness of it, was almost satisfying. Honest, the man said. He picked up his coffee cup, took a measured sip, set it back down. Here's something honest. That woman over there, from what I can tell in the last few minutes, is more composed, more interesting, and more worth this table than you have been since you walked in. And I don't know her. I'm just a guy with a cup of bad coffee, watching you decide that your discomfort is somehow her problem to apologize for. He tilted his head slightly. That's honest. Marcus opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He closed it again. His jaw tightened. He looked at Sabrina, and for just a moment, something crossed his face. Shame, maybe, or something close to it, but it didn't get enough oxygen to live. He pushed back his chair. "This was clearly a mistake," he said. "Yeah," the man agreed quietly. "I think it probably was." Marcus stood, buttoned his jacket with more precision than the moment required, and walked out of Veritas without looking back. The restaurant exhaled. Conversations slowly resumed. Silverware moved again. The ambient music reasserted itself over the hum of voices, and the hostess retreated with the carefully neutral expression of someone who had seen this kind of thing before and had learned that the kindest response was to pretend otherwise. Sabrina sat with her hands folded on the table. She was looking at the door Marcus had gone through. Her breathing was controlled, even, deliberate. She was not going to let this restaurant see her come undone. "Are you okay?" She turned. The man from the next table was looking at her. Not with pity. That was the first thing she registered, and it mattered more than she could have explained in that moment. Not the soft, uncomfortable pity she had grown skilled at identifying and despising. Something else. Something more like concern. The kind a person offers when they are genuinely uncertain and not simply performing the role of someone who is. "I'm fine," she said. He nodded, once, accepting this at face value. He didn't argue it, didn't push, didn't offer reassurance she hadn't asked for. He just nodded. Then he said, that word he used, handle. A beat. That one was ugly. Sabrina looked at him. "Yeah," she said. "It was." A brief silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, somehow. The kind of silence that arrives when two people have witnessed something and are simply acknowledging it without needing to fill every space with noise. "You didn't have to do that," she said. "I know." He turned his coffee cup slowly in his hands. "But my daughter is 8 years old, and I spend a lot of time thinking about what kind of man she's going to watch her father be." A small pause. That seemed like a pretty easy call. Sabrina was quiet for a moment. Then, for the first time since she had sat down in this restaurant, something in her chest released. Not much. A thread. But enough. "I'm Sabrina," she said. He met her eyes, and there was warmth in his. Uncomplicated, direct. No performance to it. "Ethan," he said. "Cole, I was just having coffee. Waiting for a call from the school nurse, actually. Lucy thought she had a fever. Turns out she was nervous about a math test." "Is she okay?" "Aced it," he said. "Apparently." Sabrina laughed. It surprised her, the way it came out, clean and sudden, without the careful editing she usually applied to her own reactions in public. It was a real laugh, the kind she had almost forgotten she was capable of. Ethan smiled at it. Not triumphantly, just warmly. The way a person smiles when they are glad something happened. "Can I—" He stopped himself. Reconsidered. Started again. "I don't want to intrude on your evening more than I already have, but if you haven't ordered, and you don't want to be alone right now, I'm in no rush." Sabrina looked at him for a long moment. She thought about the quarterly reports on her phone, about her father's voice on the last call, clipped and managing, about the 12-hour days and the empty apartment and the way her therapist had said, very gently, protecting yourself from connection is not the same thing as being safe. She thought about Marcus Hendris, who had looked at the wheelchair and seen a liability. She thought about this man, who had looked at her, just her, sitting at a table, and seen something worth defending. "I've ordered a Caesar salad," she said. "They haven't brought it yet, but I'm warned you in advance. I have strong opinions about anchovy to dressing ratio." Ethan Cole picked up his coffee and moved to her table. "I can respect that," he said. She didn't tell him what she did for the first 20 minutes. That wasn't dishonesty. It was the same choice she'd made with Marcus. the same refusal to let a title lead the conversation. She was trying to understand something first, trying to see if the quality of a conversation could hold up past the point where credentials became visible. Ethan talked about Lucy, the way parents do when they are proud and terrified in equal measure, when the love is so tangled into the daily mechanics of school runs and dinner logistics and the specific sadness of a child who misses someone that you can't really separate the tenderness from the exhaustion. Lucy was 8, with her mother's stubbornness and her father's habit of asking questions at inconvenient times. Her mother had been gone for 4 years. Not dead, Ethan clarified carefully. Just gone. That was its own kind of complicated. She went to Portland, he said. New relationship, new life. He said it without bitterness, which was the thing Sabrina noticed most. Not performed acceptance, just the settled acknowledgement of someone who has processed a painful thing and made peace with the shape it left behind. Lucy talks to her on video calls. It's not what either of them want, but it's what we've got. How do you manage it? Sabrina asked. Badly some days, he said. Well, on others. He half smiled. And with a lot of mac and cheese on the nights somewhere in between. She told him about the accident on her own terms, about 10 minutes in. Not because it felt required, but because the conversation had drifted naturally toward the subject of the things that change you. The things you don't plan for, don't architect, don't see coming until they have already rearranged everything. And it felt dishonest not to mention it. Not after Marcus. Not with a man who had already demonstrated that he was capable of meeting reality without flinching. 6 years ago, she said. Highway 101. It was raining. The car in front of me stopped. She kept her voice matter-of-fact. She had told this story enough times that the rawness had smoothed out of it, but the shape of it was still there. The weight still present underneath the facts. The spinal cord. They said incomplete, which means some things still work, just not the way they used to. I was in the hospital for 4 months. I relearned a lot of things. Ethan listened without interrupting. He didn't shift his gaze away or reconfigure his expression into the careful blankness people sometimes used when they didn't know how to respond to disability. He just listened. And when she finished, he said, "That's a long 4 months." "Yes," she said. "It was." "And then you built a company." "Then I built a company," she confirmed. He nodded slowly, with the look of a man revising something. Not his opinion of her exactly, but the frame around it, making it larger. "What kind of company?" he asked. She told him. She watched his face. For the flicker that came when people realized they were talking to significant wealth. The slight recalibration that made everything after slightly more calculated. Some people leaned in. Others leaned back. Both reactions were performances. Ethan Cole did neither. He said, "Huh. So you actually deal with the kind of guys I fix cars for?" She blinked. "What?" "Tech executives. Half of them bring in Teslas, the other half bring in whatever classic car they bought to convince themselves they have a personality." He tilted his coffee cup. "They're usually less interesting than the car." Sabrina stared at him, and then she laughed again. That same clean, unguarded laugh that had surprised her the first time, surprising her again now. And she thought, when did I stop doing this? When did laughing in public become something I had to budget for? "That's not wrong," she admitted. "I didn't think it was." They talked through the Caesar salad, and through a dessert that neither of them had planned to order, and through 2 more cups of the coffee that Ethan had already described as bad, but continued to drink with apparent enthusiasm. The restaurant around them thinned, early diners leaving, the later crowd taking their time, And Sabrina realized at some point that she had forgotten to be performing, had forgotten to be the CEO, or the woman in the wheelchair, or the cautionary tale, or any of the other roles the world had been quietly casting her in for 6 years. She was just here, at a table, with a man who had a daughter who'd aced her math test, and strong opinions about what constituted an honest conversation. It was, she thought, the most comfortable she had felt in a very long time. When the check came, and the conversation about who would pay for it was brief and slightly absurd, ending with a negotiated arrangement that satisfied neither of them entirely, and both of them adequately, Ethan walked with her toward the door. Not behind her, not in front, beside. That was the word she kept coming back to later, when she was back in her apartment and the city was dark outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, and she was sitting with a glass of wine she barely touched, running the evening back through her memory. Beside. At the entrance to Veritas, they stopped. The night was cool, and the street beyond was quiet. Midweek, mid-evening, the particular stillness of a city between its rush hours. "Thank you," Sabrina said, "for what you did earlier."
"You would have handled it," Ethan said.
"I know," she said, "but it helped. That you did." He looked at her for a moment, and there was something careful in it. Not hesitation, exactly. More like the look of a man deciding whether to say the true thing. He decided. "I meant what I said in there," he said. "About my daughter. About the kind of man she's going to watch me be." He paused. "I've been thinking about that a lot lately. Whether I'm getting that right." "What does she say?" "She says I'm embarrassing," Ethan said, "which, according to her third-grade teacher, is developmentally appropriate." Sabrina smiled. He took out his phone. "This is probably... I don't know if this is..." He stopped, exhaled a short breath that might have been a laugh at himself. "I'm usually better at this, I think." "Are you asking for my number?" "I'm asking if that's something you'd want to give me," he said. "Which is a different question." She looked at him in the cool dark outside the restaurant. She thought about the calculus she usually ran, the risk assessment, the weight of her own history, the fear that sat underneath every genuine connection like water under ice. She thought about the last 6 years of deciding that control was the same thing as safety. She held out her hand. "Give me your phone," she said. He gave it to her. She typed in her number, and then, because something about the evening had shifted the arithmetic, she added a second line. Her personal number. The one she had given fewer than 10 people in the last 6 years. She handed it back. Ethan looked at the screen. "2 numbers," he said. "Don't make it weird," she said. He looked up. The smile reached his eyes before it reached his mouth, and in the light from the restaurant windows, it was the most uncomplicated thing she had seen all evening. "Good night, Sabrina Vale," he said. "Good night, Ethan Cole," she said. She moved her chair toward the waiting car at the curb. Her driver, patient, accustomed to her rhythms, and she did not look back. But she heard his footsteps on the sidewalk, moving in the other direction. And she thought, beside, she thought, that's the word. And for the first time in a long time, she let herself think it without immediately looking for reasons to take it back. He texted her the next morning. Not early, not the kind of early that announces itself as eagerness. Mid-morning, the kind of hour that says, I thought about it and then I did it, which Sabrina found, to her own mild surprise, considerably more appealing than eagerness would have been. The message said, Lucy wants to know if the CEO lady is okay. I told her I didn't know a CEO lady. She said, and I quote, Dad, you're the worst liar. Sabrina read it twice, sitting at her desk on the 14th floor, with a half-finished coffee going cold beside her laptop and 3 unread briefs waiting in her inbox. She read it a third time. Then she set her phone face down on the desk and went back to the briefs. She picked the phone up again 40 seconds later. "Tell Lucy I'm okay," she typed, "and that her dad is, in fact, a terrible liar." I could tell within the first 10 minutes. His response came while she was on a call with her CFO. She saw it flash across the screen and made herself wait until the call ended before she looked at it. She says, "Obviously. She also wants to know your favorite color." I told her that's not an appropriate follow-up question. She told me I don't understand how friendship works. Sabrina set the phone down again. This time she was smiling, and she knew it, and she didn't particularly try to stop. Dana, her assistant, appeared in the doorway with the look of someone who has been watching their boss's body language shift for the last 20 minutes and has arrived at a conclusion. "You're in a good mood," Dana said, with the careful neutrality of someone who has learned to frame observations as nothing more than observations. "I'm always in a good mood," Sabrina said. "You told the board's legal rep that his contract language was, and I'm quoting from my notes here, the kind of thing a tired second-year associate writes when they've given up caring whether anyone reads it." That was accurate feedback. It was 8:45 in the morning. "Dana, I'm just noting the contrast." Sabrina turned back to her laptop. "Pull the Meridian file and get me the comparative figures from Q3. I need them before the 2 o'clock. Dana pulled the file, but on her way out of the office, she paused. "Good mood looks good on you," she said. "Just for the record." Sabrina didn't respond to that, but she didn't turn the phone face down again either. They talked every day for the next 2 weeks, and Sabrina kept waiting for the thing that would make it complicated. That was her habit. Not pessimism exactly, but a kind of vigilant realism she had developed over years of learning that the things which looked simple were usually only simple from a distance. She waited for Marcus Hendris's particular brand of retreat dressed up as honesty. She waited for the slight recalibration that came when men processed the wheelchair not as a fact of her life, but as a condition of theirs. She waited for the moment when Ethan Cole, who had seemed so uncomplicated in the low light of that restaurant, would reveal the layer underneath. It didn't come. What came instead was Ethan every morning, with something small and specific. A text about Lucy's latest academic crisis, a question about whatever she'd mentioned the day before, the occasional blurry photograph of an engine component accompanied by the message, "Tell me this doesn't look like a Picasso to you?" And every evening, a call. Never long, never scheduled, but consistent in the way that reliable things are consistent, not because someone is performing reliability, but because showing up is simply who they are. She told him things. That surprised her more than anything else. Not the big things, not yet, not quickly, but the small ones, the ones she had learned to treat as private because they didn't fit the image of a woman who had built something out of the wreckage of her own life. She told him about the nights when the pain came back. Not the sharp kind, but the dull, insistent kind that lived in the nerves that hadn't quite healed right. The kind that arrived at 2 in the morning and made sleep a negotiation. She told him about her father, carefully in outline only, the way you describe a country you're not sure is safe to visit. The power he held over the company's board, the way he had always treated her success as a reflection of himself rather than of her. She told him that she had started eating real dinners again, which she hadn't done with any regularity since the accident, because somehow his habit of calling in the early evening had restructured the hour. Ethan listened the way he had listened in the restaurant, completely, without the faint impatience that she had learned to recognize in people who were waiting for their turn to speak. And he told her things in return. About the shop. The garage he'd bought from his old boss 7 years ago, built into something that survived by being the kind of place where honest work got done at honest prices, which, in his industry, was rarer than it should have been. About the particular mathematics of being a single father. The way every decision had to account for a second human being. The way you could not be reckless, even in the moments when recklessness seemed appealing. The way Lucy's face had become the measuring stick for his own choices. About the quiet of his apartment after she went to bed at night. The specific weight of a silence that is both peaceful and lonely in equal measure. "Does she ask about her mom?" Sabrina asked one evening. "Every couple of weeks something surfaces," Ethan said. "Last Tuesday she wanted to know why some moms leave and some moms stay. I told her I thought every family had its own shape, and that the love didn't go away just because the shape changed." A pause.
She said that sounded like something from a book.
Was she wrong?
No, he admitted. I'd read it somewhere, but I believed it when I said it, which I think is close enough.
Sabrina was quiet for a moment. What did she say after that? She said, "Okay, Dad," and then she asked if we could have pizza. A beat. "So, I think we're good." It was the third week when he asked if he could take her somewhere. Not dinner, he was specific about that. Not a restaurant. Just somewhere he wanted to show her, if she was open to it. No pressure, no agenda. Just a thing he thought she might find interesting. "That's a lot of qualifications for a simple invitation," she said. "I'm out of practice," he said. "I'm aware." "Where?" she asked. He told her. She said yes. It was a park on the eastern edge of the city that most people drove past on the way to somewhere else. Sabrina had passed it herself, she realized. She simply had never stopped.
Ethan had picked a path that ran along the water's edge, and when she'd asked, with the particular pragmatism she applied to all logistics, whether the surface was navigable in a chair, he had simply said, "I checked. It's paved all the way through. And if any part isn't, we turn around. Not a big deal." Which it wasn't, which was precisely why it mattered. Lucy came with them. Sabrina had not expected that, and then, when she thought about it, she had. Because Ethan Cole did not compartmentalize the way most people did. Lucy was not a separate part of his life, to be introduced when a relationship had cleared some invisible threshold of seriousness. Lucy was his life, and Ethan apparently operated on the principle that the people worth knowing were people who could understand that. Lucy was 8, with her father's directness and her own particular ferocity. She appeared at the park entrance holding a paper bag of pretzels that she had apparently decided were a communal responsibility, walked straight to Sabrina's chair without a pause, and said, "My dad said I shouldn't ask too many questions, but I only have 3. Sabrina looked up at Ethan, who was wearing the expression of a man who had anticipated this and accepted it as a natural consequence of his choices. "3 questions seems reasonable," Sabrina said. "Go ahead." "Okay." Lucy held up one finger. "What happened to your legs?" "Lucy," Ethan said. "She said I could ask." "It's all right," Sabrina said. She looked at Lucy directly. "I was in a car accident 6 years ago. My spinal cord was injured, and the nerves that tell my legs to work don't send the signal the right way anymore. So I use the chair instead." Lucy processed this with visible thoroughness. "Does it hurt?" "Sometimes. Not right now." "Okay." A second finger. "Do you like pretzels?" A beat. "Yes," Sabrina said. Lucy nodded with the gravity of someone recording important data. "Last question." She tilted her head. "Are you going to be mean to my dad?" The park was quiet around them. Somewhere ahead, a bird made a sound and was quiet again. Ethan said, "Lucy." "No," Sabrina said. "That's a good question." She looked at the girl, small and serious, with dark eyes that held the particular wariness of a child who has learned that adults sometimes leave. "I'm not going to be mean to your dad."
How do I know? You don't, Sabrina said honestly. Not yet. But I'll give you time to find out. If that works. Lucy considered this for approximately 4 seconds. Then she held out the bag of pretzels. You can have 2, she said. They're the good kind, with salt. Ethan exhaled. They walked the path along the water, Ethan on her left, Lucy oscillating between her own private investigations of rocks and trees and whatever the park's edge offered, and the conversation between Sabrina and Ethan settling into the easy register of 2 people who are no longer in the business of impressing each other, and have arrived instead at the more interesting work of simply being honest. She told him about the board meeting she had that week, about the particular exhaustion of walking into a room where half the people had known her father longer than they had known her, where the company's founding story existed as a kind of mythology that preceded her, and sometimes overshadowed her. She told him that her father had built something remarkable, and that she had rebuilt it differently, and that those 2 things were both true simultaneously, and that some days the tension between them was the loudest thing in the room. Does he respect what you've done? Ethan asked. Sabrina was quiet. He respects the numbers, she said finally. He respects the valuation. He respects what the company represents on paper. She chose her words with the particular care of someone who has spent a long time deciding how much of a wound to expose. He has never once asked me how I'm doing it, only whether it's working. Ethan walked beside her in silence for a moment. My old boss, he said, when I bought the shop from him, he came back 6 months later and looked at everything I'd changed, and he said, "You're doing it wrong." He paused. I asked him if the numbers were wrong. He said no. I said, "Then I'm doing it differently, which isn't the same thing." Sabrina looked at him. He still thinks I'm doing it wrong, Ethan added. But he sends his brother-in-law to us for oil changes, so... Something in her chest loosened, the same way it had in the restaurant, the same release of a thing she hadn't realized she was holding. Is that a metaphor? I wasn't going for one, he said, but sure. She laughed. Lucy reappeared from behind a tree with a flat stone and an expression of deep, personal vindication. I found the good kind, she announced, and held it up for evaluation. Beautiful, Ethan told her, with the complete sincerity of a man who has learned that his daughter's finds deserve genuine response. Lucy looked at Sabrina. You have to say too. It's a great stone, Sabrina said. Lucy examined her face for signs of performance, found none, and pocketed the stone with satisfaction. On the walk back, Lucy reached out and took Sabrina's hand, briefly, unselfconsciously, the way children sometimes do when they have decided something and want to mark it without making a speech. Then she let go and ran ahead. Ethan said nothing. Sabrina said nothing either, but her hand, in her lap, was still warm. The call came from her father on a Thursday. It came the way his calls always came, through Dana first, flagged as important, which in Graham Vale's vocabulary meant that he had decided something required her immediate attention and expected the geography of her schedule to rearrange itself accordingly. She took the call in her office with the door closed. I hear you've been seeing someone, Graham said. No preamble, no hello. That was his style, the directness of a man who had learned that power was partly a function of never appearing to need the social scaffolding that other people required. Sabrina set her pen down. Who did you talk to? That's not the question. It's the question I'm asking. A pause, his particular pause, the one that said he was deciding whether to engage with her framing or overwrite it with his own. I have eyes everywhere, Sabrina. You know that. I always have. Then you already know the answer to your question, and you're calling for another reason. She could almost hear him reset.
He's a mechanic. Yes. He runs a garage. He owns a garage, she said. There's a difference. At the level we operate at the level I operate at, Dad. Her voice stayed even. She had practiced this evenness for years, with him specifically, in conversations exactly like this one. The ones where he moved into her life with the quiet authority of someone who had never quite accepted that it was her life and not an extension of his. The company is mine. The decisions are mine, including this one. I'm not trying to manage your personal life. You called me on a Thursday to tell me the profession of a man I've been spending time with. So, I'm concerned, he said. The word concerned, in Graham Vale's mouth, was a specific instrument, not entirely dishonest, but shaped to serve multiple purposes simultaneously. You've worked too hard, built too much. The last thing you need is a distraction that could affect your public image, your board relationships. My board relationships are fine. Henderson has been asking questions. Henderson asks questions when the weather changes. That's what Henderson does. Sabrina. His voice dropped into the register he used when he wanted her to understand that the conversation had shifted from conversation to instruction. I'm asking you to be thoughtful about this. She picked up her pen again. I'm always thoughtful, she said. That's also mine. She ended the call before he did, which she rarely did, and which felt, in the moment, like something small and necessary. She didn't tell Ethan about the call that day, not because she was hiding it, but because she understood, with a clarity that arrived slowly and then all at once, that telling him would require her to explain Graham Vale in full. And explaining Graham Vale in full meant explaining all of it. The company, the founding, the accident, and what her father had done in the months after it, when she was still in the hospital and he had quietly moved to restructure the board in ways that would ensure he retained leverage over decisions that should have been solely hers. It meant explaining the shape of a wound she had carried for 6 years and had never fully shown anyone. She sat with it for 2 days. On a Saturday morning, Ethan called to ask if she wanted to bring coffee to the shop. Lucy had a sleepover at a friend's, and he was working on a '67 Mustang that had come in from an estate sale, and he thought she might want to see it, if she wasn't busy. She brought the coffee. She sat in the office doorway of his garage, small, unpretentious, smelling of oil and metal, and the particular warmth of machines that have been handled. And she watched him work for a while, and something about the simplicity of it, the directness of a man who used his hands to fix things, and saw no need to frame that as anything other than what it was, made the words easier to find. My father called me Thursday, she said. Ethan looked up from under the hood. He waited. He knows about you, she said. I don't know who told him. I don't always know how he finds things out. But he does, and he did, and he called to make sure I understood that he has concerns. About me. About anything he can't control. She said it plainly, without the anger she sometimes felt underneath it. Not because the anger wasn't there, but because anger wasn't the useful thing right now. Understanding was. He's been managing this company, managing me, since before I was out of the hospital. He restructured the board while I was still in a rehabilitation facility. He did it carefully enough that I couldn't undo it without a fight that would have cost me the company in the short term. So I didn't fight it. She looked at her coffee cup. I rebuilt around it instead. It took 3 years, but I did it. Ethan was quiet for a long moment. He wiped his hands on a cloth and leaned against the side of the car, facing her. So he still has leverage, he said. Some, less than he used to. She looked up. But enough that when he decides something is a problem, he has tools. Real ones. She watched Ethan absorb this, watched him run it through whatever calculus he applied the things that mattered.
Direct, honest, unspectacular. "Are you telling me this because you're worried about me?" he asked. "Or because you're worried about us?" She considered the question with the seriousness it deserved. "Both," she said. He looked at her for a long moment. "Okay," he said. "That's it?" "I'm not going anywhere because your father is difficult," he said. "I fix things for a living. Difficult is usually just complicated with worse PR." He pushed off from the car and picked up his wrench. "But I appreciate you telling me." She looked at him. "You're very strange," she said. "Lucy says the same thing," he said. "She means it as a compliment." Sabrina settled back in the doorway with her coffee. Outside, the city moved through its Saturday rhythms, and inside the garage, the '67 Mustang waited to be put back together. And somewhere, between the oil and the morning light, and the sound of a wrench turning in a capable hand, Sabrina Vale thought, for the second time in 3 weeks, in the quiet company of this man, that something was growing in the space she had kept empty for a very long time. She didn't examine it too closely. She just let it be there. The thing about Graham Vale was that he never did anything loudly. That was the part Sabrina had spent years trying to explain to people who hadn't grown up in the orbit of a man like him. The way his power operated, not through noise or spectacle, but through the quiet, precise application of pressure in places where it would be felt most. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten in language that could be repeated in a room full of witnesses. He simply made things inconvenient, and then more inconvenient, and then quietly, inexorably impossible, until the person on the receiving end arrived at the conclusion he had always intended them to arrive at, and believed somehow that they had arrived there on their own. Sabrina knew his methods the way you know the weather pattern of the place you grew up in. Intuitively, in your bones, before you even look at the sky. So when her phone started doing strange things in the second week of October, calls dropping mid-conversation, texts to Ethan that she later discovered had never arrived, she didn't immediately conclude it was her father. She concluded it was her father by the 3rd day, and spent the 4th day sitting with that knowledge, turning it over, deciding what to do with it. She said nothing to Ethan, not yet. But she made a call to a lawyer she trusted, one who had no relationship with the Vale board, whose firm her father had no access to. And she started documenting. Because that was what you did when you knew Graham Vale was moving. You built your record before he built his. What she didn't anticipate, what she had not calculated for, and this failure of calculation would cost her a specific kind of pain she wasn't prepared for, was that her father would go directly for Ethan. Not through legal channels, not through professional interference, not through the subtle financial pressures he had applied to other people who had moved too close to his daughter in ways he found inconvenient. Directly. Personally. With men. Ethan didn't call her that night. That was the first thing. He always called on Tuesday evenings. It had become their rhythm over the past month, the way certain hours belong to certain people when you've let them into the pattern of your days. But Tuesday came and went, and the phone stayed quiet, and by 9 o'clock Sabrina had sent 2 texts that sat undelivered without a response. She told herself it was nothing. He got busy. Lucy needed something. The shop ran late. By Wednesday morning, she knew it wasn't nothing. He picked up on the 4th ring. "Ethan?" She heard something in the single syllable of his name. A quality she couldn't immediately name. Not quite silence, but close to it. A flattening. "What happened?" A pause. Long enough that she understood something had already been decided on his end, and that she was arriving after the decision rather than before it. "I need to tell you something," he said. Then tell me. Another pause. 2 men came to the shop Monday night, after closing. I was locking up, and they were just there, already inside. Sabrina's hand tightened on her phone. They didn't say who sent them, Ethan said. They didn't have to. They knew your name, Lucy's name, the school she goes to, the route I drive her in the morning. His voice was level, but underneath it was something she could hear clearly. Something between anger and a fear he was trying to metabolize in the calm. They knew the name of Lucy's teacher, her classroom number. Ethan, they didn't hurt me badly, he said. A couple of ribs, my hand. The way he said it, cleanly, without drama, as though inventory of damage was simply a practical matter, made it worse. I told Lucy I walked into an engine block. She's 8. She believed me. Or she pretended to, which might be the same thing. This was my father, Sabrina said. She didn't frame it as a question. I know, he said. I'm going to... Sabrina. Her name in his mouth, that particular way, quiet and complete, stopped her. I've been up for 2 days thinking about this. I've gone through it every way I know how. She could hear him breathing, steady and deliberate, the way someone breathes when they are managing something large. I can't do this to Lucy. The sentence arrived in her chest like something physical. What are you saying? She said, though she already knew. She knew the shape of it before he finished it. That was the thing about knowing something. You could hear it coming. You could feel the weight of it in the air before it landed, and still not be ready for the moment it did. She's 8 years old, Ethan said. She's the only thing in my life that I would not risk, not for anything. A pause. Not even for this. Ethan, I can handle my father. You've been handling your father your whole life, he said, and the gentleness in it was the sharpest part. And I respect that. I do. But handling him has a cost, and I can't put that cost on Lucy. His voice broke, just slightly, at the edge of one syllable, and then steadied. She already lost one person. I won't be the reason she loses the life I've spent 4 years building back for her. Sabrina was in her apartment. She had walked to the window without realizing it, and the city was spread below her, all light and distance, and she was holding the phone against her ear and feeling the particular cold that arrives when something you had finally let yourself want begins to close. You're not protecting Lucy, she said. You're letting him win. Maybe, Ethan said. But right now, Lucy matters more than winning. And I don't. A silence. You know that's not what I mean. Then say what you mean. She heard her own voice, controlled even, the same register she used in boardrooms when she needed people to understand that she would not be managed. Because from where I'm standing, Ethan, it sounds like you're making a decision about my life without asking me what I want. I'm making a decision about my daughter's life, he said, which is mine to make. And us, she said. That decision is also about us. The silence stretched. Yes, he said quietly. It is. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth for just a moment. One moment only. She allowed herself that. Then she said, Don't do this. Sabrina, I'm asking you. Don't do this because my father sent 2 men to frighten you. Don't let him write this ending. Her voice was steady. She had always been better at steady than at broken, in the moments when she needed to choose. He has done this my entire life. He has moved people out of my orbit because he could, because his leverage was real and people felt it and walked away. And I have watched it happen and told myself it was their choice and that I was fine. She stopped, took one breath. I'm telling you that I am not fine with this one. Another silence. This one felt different, heavier, like something being held. "I hear you," Ethan said. "I do." Then, "But I watched those men look at a picture of my daughter's school," he said. "And I have not slept in 2 days, Sabrina. I close my eyes, and that's what I see." His voice was raw now, not trying to hide it. "I'm not strong enough to stand in front of that right now. I wish I was. I want to tell you I am, but I'm not." She stood at the window for a long time after the call ended. She didn't move. She watched the city, which continued doing what cities do. Indifferent, luminous, relentlessly present. And she thought about all the things she could have said differently. Then she thought about her father, and something in her, something that had been patient for a very long time, went very still and very hard. She called Graham Vale at 7 the next morning. Not through Dana, not through his assistant. She called his personal cell phone, the number she had never used for anything other than genuine emergencies, which he would understand immediately as its own message. He picked up after 2 rings. "Sabrina." His voice held the particular tone he used when he was calculating. "I wasn't expecting—" "I know what you did," she said. A beat. He let it settle without rushing to fill it, which was its own answer. "I don't know what you've been told. Don't." The word was flat, not raised, not theatrical, just absolutely final. "Don't do the thing where you make me work to prove the thing we both already know. I'm not doing that today." A silence. "He's not right for you," Graham said. And the terrible thing, the part that made it complicated, the part she had been wrestling with her entire life, was that there was something genuine in it, not performance. Her father was not a man who loved nothing. He was a man who loved badly, whose love expressed itself as management, as control, as the absolute conviction that he knew better and therefore had the right to act accordingly. He believed he was protecting her. He had always believed that. The belief didn't make it less damaging, but it made it harder to hold in a single hand. "He is a mechanic with a daughter and a garage and no connection to this industry," Graham continued. "And you are the CEO of a publicly traded company with a board that is watching your every decision. You know the optics of this." "The optics," she said. "The perception, Sabrina. This is not— You had men put their hands on him." Her voice was quiet and absolutely cold. "You had men stand inside his shop and tell him where my daughter goes to school. She's not your daughter." "You used a child," Sabrina said. "You used an 8-year-old girl as leverage against a man whose only offense was sitting next to me at a restaurant and treating me like a human being." She stopped. She was breathing carefully, deliberately. "That's what you did, with your hands, your money, your decisions." He said nothing. "You have done this to me before," she said. "Not like this, not this directly, but you have moved people. You have applied pressure. You have decided, on my behalf, what I was allowed to have and who was allowed to be close to me. And I have let it happen, because fighting you has always come with a cost I wasn't ready to pay." A breath. "I'm ready now. Sabrina." His voice dropped into the register of a parent who believes they are being reasonable. "You're emotional. I'm clear," she said. "There's a difference. You've spent 30 years confusing the two." She let that land. "I want you to understand something. Whatever you do next, whoever you call, whatever leverage you think you have with the board, I want you to understand that I have been building a case for 3 years. I have documentation of every time you moved without my authorization. Every restructure, every board conversation, every decision that should have been mine that you quietly redirected." A pause. "I wasn't sure I would ever need it. I built it anyway, because you taught me to." The silence on the line was different now. "You would do that," he said, and for the first time, she heard something underneath the control. "You would take this public, damage the company, damage the family." "I would hold you accountable," she said, "which is not the same thing. You built something real. I know that. I have never not known that. But you have been managing me like an asset instead of loving me like a daughter for long enough." She stopped. When she continued, her voice was lower, and the anger had shifted into something more exposed, more honest, and therefore more devastating. "I needed a father after the accident. I needed someone who would look at me in that hospital and see me, and not the company, and not the optics, and not the liability. And you didn't do that. You restructured the board." Her voice held. She would not let it break on a phone call with this man. "So don't talk to me about what you're protecting." The line was very quiet. "What do you want from me?" he said finally. "I want you to leave Ethan Cole alone," she said. "I want you to understand that whatever comes next in my life, personally, professionally, is mine to decide. And I want you to know that if you move against him again or against his daughter, I will walk into that boardroom with everything I have, and I will make you explain yourself in public." She ended the call. She sat for a moment in the quiet of her office, her phone in her hands, and she noticed that her hands were not shaking. She was surprised by that, and then she wasn't. She had been building toward this conversation for years. The steadiness wasn't distance from what she felt. It was the product of having finally decided. She drove to the shop herself, or rather, her driver took her. But she had called ahead, and when she arrived, Ethan was there alone, Lucy still at school, the shop quiet in the mid-morning hour, when the day's first cars had been checked in and the work was running. He came out from the back when he heard the car, and he stopped when he saw her. His left hand had a wrap on 2 fingers. There was a bruise at the edge of his jaw, faded to yellow-green at the margins. He looked like a man who had not slept enough, and had not complained about it, which was the most Ethan Cole thing she could have imagined, and the thing that made her chest tighten the hardest. "Hey," he said. "I talked to my father this morning," she said. He looked at her. He didn't move closer. He was holding something back. She could feel it. Not coldness, but a kind of suspended caution. The stance of someone who has made a painful decision and is not yet certain it still stands. "I told him to stop," she said. "And I meant it. And I have the tools to make it mean something." She met his eyes. "I'm not asking you to take that on faith. I know what that would cost you right now. I know what you saw when those men were in your shop. And I know that the weight of that is about Lucy and not about me." She paused. "But I needed you to know that I'm not standing still on this. I'm not waiting for him to set the terms of my life." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. "You confronted him," he said. "I confronted him. How did it go?" "He was quiet at the end," she said. "For my father, that means something." He looked at his wrapped hand, then back at her. "Sabrina," he said. "What he did..." He stopped, started again. "The way I felt those 2 nights, watching Lucy sleep and thinking about what could have..." He didn't finish that sentence, and he didn't need to. The shape of it was present in every word around the absence. "I'm not built to walk away from my kid to prove a point, even a point I believe in." "I know," she said, "but I'm also..." He exhaled. "I'm not built to let a man like your father write the end of something good." He looked at her directly. "Because this has been good, Sabrina, whatever else it is. It's been good." She held his gaze. "It has," she said. "I made a decision," he said, "when I was scared.
And I think, he paused, I think maybe I made it before I knew you'd fight. I always fight, she said. It's a character flaw. He almost smiled. Not quite, but close. Lucy asked about you this morning, he said. She wanted to know if you were coming to look at the Mustang again. Sabrina felt something shift in the center of her chest. What did you tell her? I told her I didn't know yet. A beat. I'd like to see the Mustang, Sabrina said. He looked at her, and this time, the thing she saw in his face was not caution or suspension, but the simpler, realer thing underneath. The thing he'd been carrying for 2 sleepless nights, alongside the fear and the anger and the ache of a decision he hadn't wanted to make. He stepped aside and held the door open. She moved past him, into the warmth of the shop, into the smell of oil and metal, and the particular honesty of a place where things were fixed by hand. Behind her, she heard the door close. Not an ending, a re-entry. But she also knew, with the clarity that had been building since her father's call on that Thursday, since the phone conversation that had stripped something bare in her, that Graham Vale was not done. A man like her father did not hear no and simply adjust. He recalculated. He waited for the angle that hadn't been closed yet, the leverage that hadn't been fully mapped. He would move again. She didn't know yet from which direction. She just knew she would have to be ready. And this time, she was not going to be ready alone. Graham Vale waited 11 days before he moved again. Sabrina had expected it sooner. That was the thing about knowing his patterns. You could anticipate the direction, but the timing always carried its own particular cruelty. Long enough that the tension in your shoulders began to ease. Long enough that you started to believe, despite every rational signal pointing otherwise, that maybe this time was different. That maybe the conversation had landed. Then the call came from Henderson. Richard Henderson was 62, had been on the Vale board for 9 years, and possessed the particular brand of loyalty that belonged not to the company or to Sabrina, but to the man who had placed him in that chair, which was to say, to Graham. He was not stupid. He was not cruel. He was something more manageable than either. He was a man who had decided a long time ago that his professional survival was best guaranteed by aligning himself with the person who held the most power in any given room, and he had never once updated that calculation. He called Sabrina's office at 4 on a Wednesday afternoon and asked, in the careful language of a man who knows he is being recorded by history, if not by tape, for an emergency board review. Emergency review of what? Sabrina asked. Leadership stability, Henderson said. There are concerns, among several members. Concerns about the company's performance? Concerns about the situation. He paused. About recent events and their potential impact on the company's public profile. Sabrina held the phone with one hand and her pen with the other, and she made a note on the pad in front of her in her own handwriting. Henderson, Wednesday, 4 p.m. Leadership stability. Recent events. I'll need the specific concerns in writing before I agree to any review, she said. Board protocol requires that. You know that, Richard. Of course, he said. I just wanted to give you the courtesy of advance notice. The courtesy. She almost laughed. I appreciate that, she said. I'll look for the written summary. She ended the call and sat for exactly 30 seconds, allowing herself that window to feel the full shape of what was happening. The anger, the exhaustion, the familiar grinding weight of having to fight for things that should have been simply hers. Then she picked up her phone and called Dana. Get me every board document, every governance filing, and every shareholder communication from the last 24 months, she said. And call Marcus Reyes at the law firm. Tell him I need him in my office by 6. Is this about the Henderson call? Dana asked. Sabrina looked up. You knew? He called the main line first. I forwarded him to you when I understood what he was asking. A pause. I also pulled the documents already. They're in your inbox. Sabrina was quiet for a moment. Dana, she said. I've worked for you for 5 years, Dana said. I know what Graham Vale moving looks like. She told Ethan that evening. Not everything. Not the legal architecture she was building with Marcus, not the specific language Henderson had used, but the shape of it, clearly and directly. Because she had told herself after the garage that she was not doing this alone, and she intended to mean it. He went to the board, she said. They were in her apartment, Lucy at a neighbor's for the evening, the city doing its nighttime business below the windows. Ethan was sitting across from her with a coffee, listening in the way he listened, completely, without interruption. He framed it as leadership concerns. What he means is that he's trying to use our relationship as evidence that my judgment is compromised. Ethan set his coffee down. He's using us, he said. He's using the optics of us, she said. Which is, it's the most Graham Vale thing possible. He can't come after you directly anymore, not after our conversation. So he found the angle that hurts me professionally instead of personally. She looked at her hands. In some ways, it's cleaner. It's the kind of fight I know how to have. In some ways, he repeated. What about the other ways? She looked up at him. In the other ways, she said, it's my father standing in a boardroom and telling the people who run the company I built that my choices make me unreliable. She stopped. That's not a legal problem. That's just painful. Ethan said nothing for a moment. Then he got up, crossed the room, and sat beside her. He didn't say it was going to be okay. He didn't offer reassurance in the broad, unsatisfying form that people offered when they wanted to reduce your pain to something manageable enough that they could be comfortable again. He just sat beside her, his shoulder against hers, steady and present, and let the thing be what it was. What do you need from me? He said. She looked at the city. I need you to not disappear, she said. Whatever happens in that boardroom, whatever he tries to make this look like. She turned to look at him. I need you to still be here. He held her gaze with the particular steadiness that she had come to understand was not a performance of calm, but the actual thing. The real version. The kind that came from a man who had already been tested and already knew what he was made of. I'm not going anywhere, he said. We settled that. I know, she said. I just needed to hear it again. He reached out and covered her hand with his. She turned her hand over, and she held on. The written summary from Henderson arrived the following morning. It was 6 pages. Sabrina read it once quickly, for content, and then again slowly, for architecture. Because the most important thing about a document like this was not what it said on the surface, but how it was constructed, where the language tightened, where the assertions had been shaped by someone other than the man whose name was on the letterhead. By the 3rd page, she could feel her father in it. Not his voice. Graham Vale was too careful to leave fingerprints in language, but his logic. The particular way he built a case, not from direct accusation, but from the accumulation of implication, each sentence on its own reasonable, in aggregate designed to produce a specific conclusion in the mind of whoever was reading. The summary alleged that Sabrina's recent personal decisions had introduced reputational volatility at a moment of critical market positioning. It noted, carefully, without naming Ethan specifically, that the CEO's public associations had drawn media attention inconsistent with the company's investor relations strategy. It raised questions about decision-making transparency and asked the board to consider whether the current leadership structure
provided adequate governance oversight. Adequate governance oversight. She knew what that meant. She had always known what that meant when her father used it. It meant him. It meant his hand back on the wheel. She called Marcus Reyes before 8. "I read it," he said before she could speak. "Tell me what we have." "We have everything you've been building for 3 years," he said. "The unauthorized board restructure, the financial pressure applied to your Series B investors in 2021 without your knowledge, the 2 board members he placed without proper disclosure of the conflicts of interest." A pause. "And now this, which, Sabrina, this document has his fingerprints all over it. The language in Section 4 is almost verbatim from the memo he sent after the Q2 review last year. Henderson didn't write this. He signed it." "Can we prove that?" "Prove the authorship? Directly, no. Make a compelling case for it in front of the right audience? Yes." Another pause. "But here's the thing about doing this the legal way. It's slow. He knows that. He's counting on the board acting before we can fully respond." She turned this over. "When is Henderson pushing for the review?" "He's asking for 2 weeks, which means he wants it in 3 days, and he's building in negotiating room." Sabrina thought about the 6 pages, about the careful, patient architecture of implication, about 11 days of waiting before the move. "What if I don't let him set the timeline?" she said. Marcus was quiet for a moment. "What do you mean?" "What if I call the press conference first," she said, "before the review, before he gets to frame the story for the board in a room I'm not in?" A longer silence. "Sabrina," Marcus said carefully, "that's a significant escalation. He sent men to a mechanic shop to threaten an 8-year-old girl's school address," she said. "We passed significant a while ago." She heard him exhale, the particular exhale of a lawyer recalibrating between what was advisable and what was, after all, his client's decision to make. "Then we need to do it right," he said. "Complete documentation. Every claim supported. No personal language. I know that's hard, but the moment it reads like a family dispute, you lose the room. It has to be governance. It has to be corporate ethics. It has to be airtight." "How long do you need?" "Give me 72 hours. "You have 48, she said. She didn't tell Ethan about the press conference until it was built. Not because she was managing him. She had made that choice deliberately, and she examined it carefully enough to be certain it was not the old pattern of isolation dressed up as consideration. She didn't tell him because the 48 hours required her complete focus, and she knew that telling him would invite a conversation about cost and consequence, and his natural instinct to ask whether she was sure, whether she had calculated the risk, whether this was the right moment. And she loved those qualities in him, genuinely, but she needed to move without the weight of his concern until the decision was irreversible. She told him the night before. They were in the shop. He was finishing the Mustang, final detail work, the kind of hour-by-hour attention that a car like that required to be returned to the right shape. And she told him in the way she had learned to tell him things, directly, completely, without the softening that she sometimes applied to difficult news as a form of self-protection. He listened. He set down the cloth he was holding when she finished. "Tomorrow morning," he said, 10 o'clock. "At the company headquarters." "In the atrium," she said. "I'm inviting every journalist who has ever covered the company, and 2 that have been investigating my father independently." She watched his face. "Marcus has filed protective documentation with the SEC and the relevant regulatory bodies. If my father tries to move against the company as retaliation, there's a framework already in place." Ethan looked at her. "What's the risk to you?" he said. "Not the company. You." She was quiet for a moment. "The board might panic," she said, honestly. Some members might side with him, at least initially, because they've known him longer, and change is frightening. The media coverage will be intense for a period. Some investors will ask questions. She looked at him. And my father will be publicly humiliated, which means our relationship, whatever it still is, probably doesn't recover. Ethan absorbed this. Sabrina, he said. He had men in my shop. I know. He used Lucy. His voice was steady, but there was something underneath it, the particular quiet of a man who has already done his grieving about a thing and arrived at the other side. He sat wherever he sits and made a decision to use a child to shut down something he was afraid of. He shook his head, just once, barely. That's not a father who deserves the protection of his daughter's silence. She looked at him for a long time. No, she said. It's not. He picked up the cloth again, looked at the car, then back at her. Will you be nervous? He asked. Tomorrow? Yes, she said. Good, he said. Means it matters. He returned to the car, and his hands moved with the same steady competence she had watched across several months now, familiar and reliable and entirely itself. I'll be there. You don't have to. I'll be there, he said. Lucy's at school until 3. I'll be in the back of the room. He glanced at her. You won't see me unless you look. She understood what he was offering. Not the center of the story. Not a distraction. Not a presence that could be used against her by anyone in that room. Just there. In the back. If she looked. Okay, she said. The morning of the press conference, Sabrina's phone rang at 7:45. Her father. She looked at the screen for a long moment. His name, in the contact list she had never deleted, in the font she had never changed. She picked up. I know what you're doing, Graham said. His voice was controlled, but the control was effortful in a way she could hear clearly. A tightness at the edges, the sound of a man who has realized the ground has shifted and is unwilling to acknowledge it to himself. I know you know, she said. This will damage the company. Misrepresenting the governance structure for 3 years damaged the company, she said. I'm repairing it. You are burning it down. I am cleaning it up. She kept her voice even. Dad, she said the word deliberately, with the full weight of everything it meant and everything it hadn't been. I have spent 6 years running a company and being your daughter simultaneously, and I have genuinely tried, to hold both of those things without letting one destroy the other. But you sent men to a mechanic shop. You had them stand inside his building and threaten him with his child's school routine. A beat. You don't get to call me this morning and talk about damage. Silence. I was protecting you, he said. You were protecting your access to me, she said. Those are different things. You've never been able to see the difference. I think on some level you genuinely can't. And I spent a long time being angry about that. And then I spent a long time grieving it. And now I've arrived somewhere past both of those. She paused. I'm going to do what's right for the company today. And I'm going to do what's right for my life. And I'd like those two things to be true at the same time. I think they can be. Sabrina, if you want to talk after today, she said, I'm willing to do that. Not as the CEO and the board's prior chairman. As your daughter. She stopped. But that conversation has to happen on honest terms. Both of us. No leverage, no architecture, just honest. She waited for a moment. That's the offer. The line was quiet for so long she almost believed he was considering it. Then he said, very quietly, You were always too much like your mother. It landed the way he must have known it would. Direct and specific. Aimed at the precise coordinate where she was still unguarded, still reachable. Her mother, who had died when Sabrina was 11, and whose absence had shaped everything after, in ways neither of them had ever properly spoken about. She closed her eyes for 1 second. Then she said, "I hope so." She ended the call, set her phone on the counter, and looked at herself in the mirror for a long and steadying moment. This woman, this particular woman, with the chair and the company and the 6 years of rebuilding, and the father who loved her in all the wrong directions. She thought about Ethan in the back of the room. She thought about Lucy's hand, warm and brief, on that path along the water. She thought about the stone, flat and ordinary and perfect, that Lucy had carried home in her pocket. She straightened. She was ready. The atrium of Vale Technologies held 300 people. By 9:55, there were 412. Sabrina had chosen the atrium specifically because it was hers. Built in the 3rd year of her tenure, opened with a speech she had written herself, the architectural statement of a company that had moved past its founding mythology into something of its own shape. She had wanted the location to speak before she did. She moved to the podium at exactly 10 o'clock, and the room went quiet, with the particular quality of silence that belongs to moments before something irreversible. She looked out at the faces. Journalists she recognized. Investors she had spent years building trust with. Board members in the 4th row with their careful, unreadable expressions. And Henderson at the far end, slightly pale. She looked at the back of the room. Ethan was there, just as he had said. To the left, near the far wall, in his flannel shirt, his wrapped hand at his side. He wasn't performing anything. He was just standing there, steady and present, watching her. She looked at him for exactly 1 moment. He nodded, small, barely visible, the nod of one person to another that says simply, "I see you. I'm here." Sabrina Vale placed her hands on the podium, looked into the room, and began. "Good morning," she said. "I have some things I need to say clearly, on record and in public, and then I'll take your questions." The room was absolutely still. What I'm about to share concerns the governance of this company, the conduct of its founding chairman, and the reasons why I believe transparency, even when it's painful, is the only foundation on which anything real can be built. She paused. "I'll start at the beginning." She spoke for 22 minutes. Not from notes. She had prepared them, had the documents organized and sequenced with Marcus's help across 48 hours of work. But she didn't read from them. She had decided, somewhere in the quiet of the night before, that reading from paper was the wrong register for this moment. Reading from paper said, "I am presenting a case." What she needed to say required something closer to the bone than that. So she spoke from memory, which was also speaking from the body, from the 6 years of carrying this. She started with the board restructure, the timeline, the specific decisions made while she was in a rehabilitation facility, learning to navigate a world that had been rearranged without her consent. The documentation that showed her father's fingerprints on every shift in governance that had occurred in those 4 months. She walked the room through it, without drama, without inflection that telegraphed how she felt about it, because the facts were sufficient, and she had learned long ago that a woman speaking about injustice done to her was always 1 degree of visible emotion away from being dismissed as emotional. She was not going to give anyone that exit. She covered the Series B interference, the undisclosed conflicts of interest in Henderson's appointment and 2 others, the pattern of parallel communication between Graham Vale and board members that had occurred outside official channels and outside her knowledge for the better part of 3 years. And then she stopped. She looked at the room, really looked at it, at the journalists with their recorders, at the board members in the fourth row, at Henderson, whose face had passed through several colors in the last 20 minutes. And she said, "I want to be precise about something. What I have described today is a governance failure. It is a serious one, and it is documented, and it will be addressed through proper channels with the full support of our legal and regulatory frameworks." She paused. "What I am not doing today is asking for your sympathy. This company has performed. Its numbers are real. Its growth is real. And the work done by the people in this building is real. None of that changes because of what I've told you this morning. I'm standing here because transparency is not optional when you lead something that other people have trusted you with." Another pause. "And because silence, in my experience, has never actually protected anyone. It has only ever protected the people who benefit from it." A journalist in the third row, Sarah Okafor, who covered tech governance for a national publication, and who Sabrina had always respected for the particular relentlessness of her follow-up questions, raised her hand before Sabrina had finished the sentence. "Is your father aware you were making this statement today?" "He called me this morning," Sabrina said. "And?" "And I told him the same thing I'm telling you." She held Okafor's gaze. "That the offer to have an honest conversation is still open, but that I was done letting the absence of one function as protection for conduct that was wrong." "Are you calling for his resignation from any remaining board roles?" "I'm calling for a full governance review," Sabrina said. "What that review concludes will determine what comes next. I don't think it's appropriate for me to predetermine the outcome of a process I'm asking for in the name of fairness." She let that land. "But I think the evidence speaks with some clarity." There were more questions, 16 minutes of them, and she answered each one with the same flat steadiness, the same refusal to be moved into territory that was personal rather than factual, the same measured precision that had carried her through 1,000 boardrooms and 200 investor calls, and every moment in the last 6 years when the world had required her to be more composed than anyone should have to be. When it was over, she thanked the room. She moved away from the podium. And then, in the relative quiet of the atrium, as the room began to shift and break into clusters of conversation, she allowed herself to look toward the back wall. He was still there. He walked with her to the elevator, not beside the other people, her team, her lawyers, Dana moving efficiently through the atrium with the expression of someone who has been preparing for a crisis and is relieved to finally be inside it, but slightly apart, in the way he always managed to exist slightly apart from the noise, without removing himself from her. They didn't speak until the elevator closed behind them. Then Ethan said quietly, "That was something." Was it enough? She heard the rawness in her own voice. The first time all morning the register had shifted, now that the room was gone, and it was just the two of them and the hum of the elevator. Enough for what? To change it. To actually change it. She pressed the back of her hand briefly to her mouth, the same gesture she had allowed herself once before, months ago on a different phone call. One moment only. Or does he just recalibrate again? Find a different angle? And I've spent everything I had, and it doesn't... Hey. His voice was steady and close. Look at me. She looked at him. You just stood in a room of 400 people, he said, and you told the truth. Completely. On the record. In your building, with your name on the door. He held her gaze. That doesn't unhappen. Whatever he does next, that doesn't unhappen. You change the shape of the ground he has to move on. He paused. That's not nothing. That's the whole thing. She looked at him for a long moment. You were in the back of the room, she said. I said I would be.
I looked once.
I know, he said. I saw you. The elevator opened. She moved forward, and he walked beside her. That word, that particular word she kept returning to. Into the corridor, into the rest of what the day would ask of them. The board met in emergency session 4 days later. Sabrina sat at the head of the table and did not look like a woman who had spent the intervening days in back-to-back legal consultations and investor calls and the conversation with 2 SEC representatives that had lasted 3 hours. She looked like what she was, a CEO, in her seat, on her ground, with her documentation in front of her and her lawyer in the chair to her right. Henderson spoke first, because Henderson always spoke first when he was nervous, filling silence with language as a form of self-protection. I want to say, before we begin, that the characterization of certain communications in the press coverage has been, there are context issues that I think the board deserves to. Richard, Sabrina said. He stopped. I have the emails, she said. Marcus has the emails. The relevant regulatory bodies have the emails. If there are context issues you'd like to address, I'd encourage you to address them to your own counsel. She opened the folder in front of her. What I'd like to do today is move through the governance review proposal, approve the independent audit, and discuss the path forward. Is that acceptable? The table was quiet. Henderson looked at the folder, then at Marcus, then at his own hands. Yes, he said. That's acceptable. The board member to Sabrina's left, Patricia Osei, who had been appointed in Sabrina's second year, and who had been notably silent in the days since the press conference, spoke without raising her hand. I want to say something before we proceed. Everyone looked at her. Patricia was 60, direct, and had made her name in operational governance at 3 different companies before joining the Vale board. She was not a woman who spoke for effect. I've been on this board for 4 years, she said, and I have been aware, for most of those 4 years, that the dynamic between the founding chairman and the current CEO was complicated. I told myself it was a family matter, that it wasn't my place. She looked at Sabrina steadily. I was wrong about that, and I want to say it in this room, on the record, before we go any further. She turned to the folder. I support the full audit, and I support this leadership. The room shifted, not dramatically. There was no applause, no visible moment of collective relief. But something in the quality of the air changed. The way it changes when the thing that has been held in tension for a long time is finally released. One by one, with the careful incrementalism of people who are revising positions they had held longer than was comfortable, the other board members aligned. Henderson was last. He did it quietly, without drama, in the manner of a man who has read the room and understood that his own survival required a recalculation. I support the audit, he said. Sabrina wrote it in the minutes herself. Graham Vale resigned his remaining advisory role 12 days after the press conference. It came through a letter, formal, brief, delivered to the company's legal office and copied to the board. It contained no admission of wrongdoing, which Marcus had anticipated and which fell within the range of outcomes they had prepared for. It contained no personal message to Sabrina. She read it once, sitting at her desk with her morning coffee. She thought about calling him. She sat with the thought long enough to know whether it came from obligation or from something truer. She decided it was something truer. She picked up the phone. He answered on the 3rd ring. Sabrina. I got the letter, she said. I assumed you would. A silence settled between them. Not hostile, not comfortable, but honest in the way that silences can be when both people in them have stopped performing. I meant what I said, she told him. The offer is still there. Not
Not as the CEO and the former chairman. As your daughter. She paused. If you want that. Someday. On honest terms.
He was quiet for a long time. I don't know how to be that, he said finally. And it was the truest thing he had said to her in years. Maybe the truest thing she had ever heard from him. Stripped of the management and the architecture. Just the plain admission of a man who had operated at such a distance from his own emotional life for so long that he had lost the map back. I know, she said, but I'm not going anywhere. So if you figure it out... She ended the call. She sat for a moment. Then she sent Dana a message. Clear the afternoon. I'm taking the rest of the day. She picked Lucy up from school. That had been Ethan's suggestion, offered the night before with the particular casualness he used for things that actually mattered to him. The offhand tone that was not offhand at all, but the packaging he put around genuine feeling. She'd like that, he said. She'd pretend it's normal, but she'd like it. So Sabrina was there at 3 o'clock, in the school pickup line. Her driver parked and patient, herself in the passenger seat with the window down. When Lucy came out through the double doors in the current of children and spotted her immediately. Lucy did not run. She walked with the measured dignity of a person who had decided at some point that running toward things was a display of vulnerability she was not yet prepared to fully commit to. But she walked fast. You're here, she said, arriving at the car. I'm here, Sabrina confirmed. Is everything okay? Lucy's eyes moved over her with the assessment of a child who has learned to read adult faces for hidden information. Everything is okay, Sabrina said. I just had a good day and wanted to see you. Lucy processed this. Then she climbed into the back seat, dropped her backpack, and said, Can we get ice cream? I already told your dad we would. He said you'd say that. She buckled her seatbelt with satisfaction. He said you were becoming predictable. Sabrina turned to look at her. He said that? He also said, predictable in a good way. Lucy tilted her head. I don't think there is a good way. I think he was just trying to not get in trouble. Sabrina laughed, clean and sudden, the laugh she had almost forgotten she owned, the one that arrived without permission when she was around these two people, and the armor became, for a while, unnecessary. He probably was, she agreed. They met Ethan at the garage after closing. He was cleaning up when they arrived, tools returned, floor swept, the day folding itself into the particular quiet of a space that has been used honestly and is now at rest. He looked at Sabrina when she came through the door, and the question was in his face before he asked it. How did it go? He said. The board. Unanimously approved the audit, she said. Patricia Osei spoke first. She paused. And my father resigned. Ethan was still for a moment. Today? The letter came this morning. I called him after. She looked at Ethan. He said he doesn't know how to be my father, in so many words. She let out a slow breath. I told him the offer was still open. He looked at her with the expression she had come to trust most in him. Not the soft reassurance, not the performed optimism, but the clear-eyed recognition of a person who sees things as they are, and stays anyway. That took something, he said. Yes, she said. It did. He crossed the floor and put his arms around her, simply and without preamble. The way you hold someone when the words have run their course, and the only honest remaining thing is just the physical fact of being present with them. She let herself be held. She felt the solid reality of him, the flannel shirt, the careful hands, the man who had stood in the back of a room at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday morning because he said he would. And she thought about the restaurant again, about the word Marcus Hendris had used. Handle. About the way that word had arrived like a verdict. About this man who had never once looked at her that way. Dad, Lucy said from behind them, with the tone of someone who finds adult emotional displays simultaneously unnecessary and secretly satisfying. "Your shirt has grease on it again." Ethan pulled back slightly and looked down. "It has significantly less grease than last week." "That's not the bar, Dad." "The bar is always improving," he said. "That's what the bar does." Lucy made the sound of a person who has been raised by someone impossible and has accepted this as the terms of her life. Sabrina looked between them, this man and this small, serious girl, with her flat stone in her pocket and her three-question protocol for evaluating strangers, and her father's directness living in her like an inheritance. And she felt something settle in her chest. Not the relief of tension released, not the particular collapse that follows a long fight. Something quieter and more durable than either of those things. Something that felt, after a very long time, like the correct shape of things. 3 months later, a journalist from a national magazine called to ask Sabrina for a profile interview. The company's performance numbers post-audit had attracted significant attention, and the governance story had developed a life of its own in the trade press, and they wanted to write about what it looked like from the inside. "We'd love to talk about the challenges," the journalist said. "The personal elements, if you're open to it. What kept you grounded during all of it?" Sabrina thought about the question. She thought about a restaurant in the financial district, and a man with grease on his thumb, and the coffee he kept describing as bad, but kept drinking. About a child who had asked her 3 questions and handed her pretzels and taken her hand on a path by the water. About a garage that smelled like metal and honest work, and the particular warmth of a space that has been tended. About early morning texts and Tuesday evening phone calls, and the way a person could show you, simply by showing up, that showing up was the whole thing. "I had help," she said, "from someone who wasn't impressed by any of the things that were supposed to impress people." She paused. "And from an 8-year-old who wanted to know if I liked pretzels before she decided whether to trust me." The journalist laughed. "Can I quote that?" "You can quote all of it," Sabrina said. The Mustang was finished in November. Ethan drove it out of the garage on a Saturday morning with Lucy in the passenger seat, her feet on the dashboard in the way she had been told not to put her feet on dashboards. And Sabrina followed in her own car, her driver replaced by Ethan's insistence that she learn the route herself, which had led to a conversation about control that had ended, as most of their conversations about control ended, with both of them laughing at something neither of them had intended to be funny. The car went back to the estate that had commissioned it. The owner, a retired contractor in his 70s, whose father had bought the Mustang new in 1967, stood in his driveway and walked around it 3 times before he said anything. Then he said to Ethan, "You brought it back." "That's the job," Ethan said. The man looked at the car for a long time. Then he looked at Ethan, and then at Sabrina, and then at Lucy, who was examining a garden gnome near the front step with professional seriousness. "You got a good family," he said. Ethan looked at Sabrina. She looked at him. Neither of them corrected it. That night, after Lucy was asleep, Sabrina sat with Ethan on the steps outside his garage. The city hummed at a distance, low and constant, the ambient sound of a world going about its business. The air had the sharp edge of late November, and the stars were doing their best against the light pollution. "She called us a family," Sabrina said. "He," Ethan said, "the car guy. He called us a family." "Yeah." He looked up at the sky. "He did." A quiet settled between them, the good kind, the kind they had learned together over these months, the kind that didn't require filling. "Is that," she started, stopped. "Are we?" "I don't know what word you want to use," Ethan said, "but I know what it is." He turned to look at her, and in the low light his face was open and certain in the way she had come to understand was simply who he was, not performance, Not calculation, just the man. I know what this is. She looked at him. She thought about the year that had passed, about the restaurant and the mechanic and the CEO and the child and the father and the board and the press conference and the letter and the phone call and every mile of ground between the woman who had sat at that corner table expecting to be seen and the woman sitting here now, on these steps, in November, certain, finally, solidly, without the undertow of waiting for it to be taken, that she was. She reached over and covered his hand with hers. "Yeah," she said, "I know what this is too." He turned his hand over and held on. Above them, the city went on being the city. Inside, Lucy slept with the flat stone she had found at the park on her bedside table, which was where it had been since the day she found it. Because some things, once you recognize them as good, you simply keep close. And Sabrina Vale, who had built a company out of wreckage, who had stood at a podium and told the truth at full cost, who had learned that the hardest and most necessary thing was not power or resilience or even survival, but the willingness to let someone stand beside you and mean it, held on too. Not because the world was simple now. It wasn't. There would be more board meetings and more hard mornings, and more days when the pain came back in the nerves that hadn't healed right. And there would be the ongoing, complicated work of a father and daughter finding their way toward something honest. And there would be all the ordinary and extraordinary difficulties of building a life that made room for more than one person's needs. But she had learned in this year the thing she had not known she was missing. That strength was not the same as solitude. That building something real did not require building it alone. That the bravest thing she had ever done was not the press conference, or the board meeting, or the confrontation with her father. It was the night in a restaurant, when a man with grease on his thumb and nothing to gain had looked past the wheelchair and seen her, just her, sitting at a table, and decided she was worth defending. And the night she had looked back and decided he was worth letting in. That was the foundation. Everything else was built on top of it. And it held.